nobody's looking at this quite to the extreme that we are. We really say this is an aircraft in every way, except for that it has a rocket motor on board. That's the only thing that makes it a rocket. But it flies from an airport, it flies under aircraft regulation. It's reusable in the same way that you think about an aircraft as being reusable. Like reusable rockets at the moment means that you can fly them a month or 50-ish days later after a few $1 million of refurbishment. If that's how reusable a 737 was, people wouldn't call that reusable.
Welcome everyone. Today we are speaking with Stefan Powell, CTO and co-founder at Dawn Aerospace. Pretty excited to be talking to you today, Stefan. And instead of me, butchering the introduction as to what you guys do, how about you give us an insight as to who you are and what Dawn does?
Yeah. So as you said, I'm Stefan Powell, Dawn CTO of Dawn Aerospace, and one of 5 co-founders. Dawn Aerospace it's a space transportation company, really, which is a very high-level way of saying we endeavor to get things to space, maneuver them around in space, and eventually also get them back, because it's these 3 things that we really need to do to make space transportation really frictionless, so that we can have this massive sort of explosion in the amount of stuff that we're going to do in space in the next sort of 10, 20, 30, 40 years time. We foresee that we're kind of at the start of this like internet-like boom, where there's just crazy amounts of value that we're going to get out of space, just like we get out of the internet now. But it's really hard to foresee exactly what people are going to do in space. Some people are talking about internet from space or other communication stuff or Earth observation stuff, but there's actually about, probably 10 other major industries that could be trillion-dollar industries in their own right. All of them are going to need to access space in some way. We don't know exactly which ones of these are going to make it or going to be a big deal, but we know that they're all going to need to get to space, maneuver around in space, and eventually get things back down as well. So that's what Dawn Aerospace does.
Cool. So space transportation company, it would be way too simple to call it that you're building sort of rocket ships. I'd love to dig into, what makes Dawn unique relative to, the people will be a lot more familiar perhaps with, say, Rocket Lab. So what makes Dawn unique in the marketplace?
We look at this problem very holistically, from this very high level view of we need to do all of these 3 things. It's not just about getting stuff up to space. And we take a very, very long-term view on, we only want to be working on technology that's going to make sense in a industry landscape that's sort of 100 times the scale of what we're talking about now. So, it's not really okay even just to have 1 launch a week or even 1 launch a day from one place in the world is not really acceptable. We need to be talking about multiple launches a day from basically every major city in the world in a long-term sustainable way. So that means you can't be throwing away hardware. You can't be inhibiting other users like other classic rockets do. Because we're working on things under this premise, of working towards this really long-term future, we look at things very differently. So, we have to work with technology that is going to be long-term sustainable.
Good stuff. Now we're going to dig into that a bit deeper in a moment. But before we go into that, I'd love to set the stage and maybe rewind a little bit and just hear a little bit about your sort of upbringing. So what was Stefan like as a teenager? Was he always dreaming about building space planes and rockets, or what were you doing as a teenager? Not
really, actually, just probably more about just building new things. I just really loved creating stuff. My dad was an engineer, and his dad was a carpenter, and he had a shed full of tools. And I got my hands dirty a lot. Made all kinds of things from whatever Greek medieval weaponry to trebuchets, and had fun with that sort of stuff. And obviously fascination with aircraft and spacecraft, but not more than anyone else, I would have thought. I wasn't exactly a total geek for it or something, but it was really when I went off to university and I wanted to get into sustainable technologies. particularly wind energy and stuff really fascinated me. I could see the potential for it. And so I went to a university in the Netherlands that had a good history in that stuff and some really good courses and stuff on sustainable engineering, and I really enjoyed those. Unfortunately, there wasn't really much practical stuff that I could do. I still had this very practical background of wanting to build stuff with my hands. But there were local rocket clubs that you could go to, and you could build real stuff and work in a student team and pursue your own ideas about how to make something better. That's what I cared about. I just wanted to make things better. And so I did that in the context of rockets. Got to know a lot of other people who could do it as well. And we found this really amazing team that ended up being the basis for Dawn Aerospace. And we built some pretty impressive rockets by student standards. We broke some world records. We launched some really, looking back, the huge rockets, the 15,000 horsepower engines, had to go to the south of Spain from the Netherlands all the way down to the south of Spain with a team of 50 people and launched this huge 200 kilogram rocket to, Mach 2.5 and over 20 kilometers altitude. It was a really serious endeavor, but it was something we spent 5 years on and a few €100,000. And it was all over in 90 seconds sort of thing. And it was like, wow, that was cool, but man, there was a lot of work for, not a whole lot of time. And we realized it was also going to take almost the same amount of money and the same amount of time to get back to, another rocket on the pad. And we just thought, man, there's got to be a better way to do this. And that was actually when my brother James came into the fold, into Dawn Aerospace, or wasn't really Dawn Aerospace at that time. It was just the very early inklings of the company. And he had a background in aviation, particularly in building stuff for helicopters and developing a product in New Zealand and bringing that to the rest of the world. And we realized we could bring these two things together, these really high performance, high tech rockets into this operationally flexible, super high utility aircraft world. We could bring these two things together to get the performance and the utility in one thing. And that's kind of how we actually arrived at the technology that we're working on in Dawn Aerospace now.
Interesting. First and foremost, sounds like I went to the wrong university. Sounds quite incredible. Just as a side topic quickly, so, you talk about the years that went into that and the amount of money to, launch what sounded to be an incredible project. Did you guys have to self-fundraise for that, or how did that all come together?
Yeah, actually, that was the best thing about those projects is it wasn't just the engineering. We had to go do the fundraising. We had to go to other companies and convince them to let us use their expensive machines and 3D printers. And so, yeah, I say it was €200,000 worth. Probably 70% of that was just in-kind sponsorship of people making parts for us or letting us use their stuff. And it was probably, 50 or 60 grand or something in cash that we had to pay for using launch sites and stuff. So yeah, we had to run the whole thing. It was like running your own business while studying, of course, as well. Yeah,
amazing. So great practice, I suppose, before you kicked into this direction. Now, this is probably quite an ignorant question, so excuse me in advance, but the combination of, rockets and planes seems, for someone that doesn't know much about it to be, a really smart thing to do. Is there a lot of other companies around the world doing this, and why is it not more of a normal thing to be doing in terms of people putting stuff up into space?
Yes and no. It is normal. You're obviously probably aware of the space shuttle. In lots of ways, it was half a rocket, half a plane. I would say it was a plane in the sense that it had wings and a landing gear, but otherwise it flew nothing like a plane. It wasn't something you could land and put more fuel in and fly again. It wasn't something that flew under aircraft regulation. It wasn't something that even had the reliability similar to an aircraft. So once again, apart from the fact that it had wings and landing gear, it was just another rocket. And so the cost model behind it also ended up being similar to a rocket, and in fact even worse for other various reasons. Nobody's looking at this quite to the extreme that we are. We really say this is an aircraft in every way, except for that it has a rocket motor on board. That's the only thing that makes it a rocket. But it flies from an airport. It flies under aircraft regulation. It's reusable in the same way that you think about an aircraft as being reusable. Like reusable rockets at the moment means that you can fly them a month or 50-ish days later after a few $1 million of refurbishment. If that's how reusable a 737 was, people wouldn't call that reusable.
Interesting. So it actually flies from regular domestic airports, well, presumably not the ones that most planes are going in and out of, but it can do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like you're not exactly going to fly it out of Auckland International Airport, but yeah, just, there's literally thousands of airports around the world that we could fly out of, and they exist. We don't have to go build a spaceport. If we want to go fly this thing from the States, there's I think I've looked it up, there's about 900 registered airports that we could technically fly out of that are not very busy, long enough runways. Perfect. Let's go use them.
Cool. So the picture that you've got behind you, that is one of your space vehicles that you've developed, presumably? Yeah,
that's an artist's impression of our Mark II space plane at apogee. So that's flying at about 100 kilometers altitude, about to fall back down to Earth.
Cool. And then, so going back to the ideation phase, sort of having that moment of realizing alongside your brother that there could be a good combination between his expertise and what you've been doing in the Netherlands. What was the jumping off point to forming a company, and how sort of did it come together in terms of a confidence that you could actually build something that was unique?
The jumping off point was really where we realized that it wasn't actually going to be too hard to convince people that we could bring these two technologies together, because myself and three other founders in the Netherlands had kind of this rocket background, and we knew we could build a rocket engine that operates just the same way as a jet engine or any other engine. You put gas in the tank and you flick a switch and it turns on, and you flick the switch off again and it's off again. Great. And James had the background in aircraft stuff to know that if we could build this thing and we could certify it and fly it in New Zealand under New Zealand rules, we would be able to bring it to the rest of the world, that this was actually a channel that had some credence behind it. It wasn't just talk. So we knew that we could build a demonstrator, and we could, really just a model jet, just something really, really simple to show that we can build a rocket-powered aircraft that flies exactly the same way as every other aircraft. It's at a really small scale, but we can do that and show to the world that this is not a crazy idea.
Outstanding. And then, so how many years ago was that you started to build a demo, and whereabouts? Was that the same team that you had put the rocket together up in the Netherlands? Yep.
Yeah. It was kind of the top management of that team was what ended up becoming Dawn Aerospace. And that kind of kicked off around 2017. We started putting that together, and then late 2018, we kind of had our seed funding together to really get the company going and grow it beyond us 5 people.
Cool. And then in the process of sort of between then and now, what has happened since you launched your first sort of demo through to today? So what is the current state of the play, and what has happened in between those two periods of time?
Yep. So in terms of one other side of the business that we haven't really talked about at all is the in-space propulsion stuff. So that's the thrusters that we put on satellites. That was also kind of at this very early stage when we started the company in 2018. That was kind of the output of my master's thesis, actually. So we've taken that right through to commercialization. That's something that is now actually an ongoing product stream. We've got about 3 products there that we pretty regularly sell to small satellite operators. So these are people that, they put satellites together, they provide a service to some other customer. Maybe it's a communications product, or maybe it's some other space transportation product. They use our rocket motors on their satellites to give themselves maneuverability. And that's pretty good ongoing revenue now. We've got a pretty substantial team that's pumping out rocket motors about as fast as we can and selling those. That's a pretty developed part of the business. The other side, is the Mark II vehicle. That's really come a long way since we started in 2018, where it was really just sort of a back of the envelope drawing. Now it's a vehicle that really exists on our shop floor, and we're pretty close to testing that, getting it flying. First we fly it on jet engines, and later we'll fly it on full rocket engines. There's also a full rocket engine development around that to use some pretty novel propellants as well, novel engine cycles and stuff to be able to get, once again, bring this rocket performance to aircraft-like operability. It does mean you have to think about things a little bit differently. You have to consider things that otherwise wouldn't be a problem, because, we intend to use this engine, thousands of times, not once, maybe 10 times. So there's some other difficulties there. But the upshot is once we get over those difficulties, we have a piece of hardware that we almost never have to rebuild. You just put gas in the tank and flick the switch, and away she goes again.
Interesting. And in terms of those difficulties or challenges, do any sort of stick out that, someone like me could understand that you're sort of trying to solve for at the minute?
Yeah, like one really interesting one is, maybe it's a little bit too deep in the weeds, but it's metal fatigue. It's, when you cycle things, you cycle these metals over and over again, and eventually it's kind of like a paperclip. You bend it back and forth enough times and it goes bing really easily, right? Rocket engines do exactly the same thing. And actually the Space Shuttle main engine is a really good example of this. The inner walls of that engine fatigue so badly that after about 10 or so cycles, they start to get cracks down it, and you have propellant leaking into the engine where it shouldn't. And they know about it, but they know it's not too big of a problem after 10 cycles, and after 20 or so, it starts to get bad enough that you have to replace the engine. So, okay, it has limited reusability, but it works. We have to design that completely out. So instead of restraining the metals inside the engine, we have to let them breathe. We have to let them expand and contract as they get hot. So it necessitates a totally different design. So the entire internals on the engine are actually floating to allow them to breathe in and out as they get hot, so that we never have this fatigue.
Interesting. I actually have an acute understanding of that, having snapped my handlebar on my bike the other day after probably putting too much tension on it over time. So, good example, and appreciate you sort of, in some ways, dumbing that down. It's really fascinating, and I'm sure those types of conversations could go on forever. Also, the propulsion systems that you've built to power other people's satellites. Am I right to say that you're actually selling those on your website and almost like a click and collect type operation?
Yeah. We have been actually. You can add them to cart and sell them. So just buy them with a credit card if you want. To be honest, we don't actually expect anyone to use that, because it's a little bit of a ridiculous notion. Of course, they're going to come and talk to us first. But one big problem we saw with aerospace procurement in general is that it's so hard to actually go out and buy something, when really these things should almost be a commodity. This isn't that complicated. It's something it should be simple enough that you can just stick it on your satellite and it'll work. At least that's how we want it to be. So we also want to make procurement that simple, that if they need it, it's available, they can go buy it and they'll have it. It doesn't have to be harder than that. So this is supposed to be an embodiment of that.
Interesting. And then sort of looking into the future, is the business model that you will be essentially just a transportation company that is, taking payloads up into space on behalf of other people, or will you be actually selling the space planes or space vehicles and propulsion systems as a hardware company?
No, we envision that eventually people will want to have mobility as a service as a whole. So definitely that's already done for space launch. You don't typically buy the rocket, you buy the service to get to space. At the moment, that's not the case in space itself. People typically buy the rocket and stick it on their satellite, but we see that eventually transitioning. There's a whole other swath of products that will eventually come around. Some other companies are already looking into it, into providing mobility as a service, but eventually it'll all transition to that.
Interesting. Now, you are currently split between Christchurch and the Netherlands. What does that currently look like, and how does that sort of start to evolve as you expand and grow?
Yeah, so currently it's about 50% between Christchurch, New Zealand, and Delft, the Netherlands. So, 50-50. We see that continuing to grow pretty much the same. Maybe it'll be back and forth a little bit, depending on exactly which projects go ahead. But the Netherlands is really important for us just because it's such a knowledge hub. There's just so much experience in Europe and so many amazing assets and capability there, be it hypersonic wind tunnels or expertise in space environment and radiation, and just the depth of organizations like DLR, which is essentially German NASA, that we can draw on, including all of the different funding schemes, and customers are there. So there's many good reasons for us to be in the Netherlands, not to mention a really close relationship with my old university, TU Delft. In saying that, New Zealand plays a very key role in having open skies, having very forward-thinking regulatory system, and allowing us to do a bunch of stuff that would be really difficult to do in Europe around flight testing and really early stage R&D. So each of these two countries play a pretty key role in our development and how we operate. And so we'll continue to be hiring in both.
That's interesting, and answered the follow-up questions that I had as to what the strategic advantage was for New Zealand, which you've already answered there. I imagine it's really difficult to find people to sort of support what you're doing. Is that correct, particularly in New Zealand, where this is an industry that is just emerging?
Yeah, it definitely is. We often find that we end up hiring people that kind of have roughly the right skills, and then we do a lot of on-the-job training or training for our specific niche. The closer we can get to the people that we actually need, the better, though, for sure.
And so does that involve getting people coming out of certain fields of engineering within universities and maybe a combination of overseas talent? Where do you typically find people from? We have hired a reasonable amount directly from New Zealand, but also quite a few from overseas as well. We typically find people who have come straight out of university projects to be very, very good. So like if you're familiar with the UCM type racing car projects and stuff, people that have had a lot of real world experience where they have to build their own projects. They have to do their own, be their own CEOs in lots of ways. We find these people to be excellent, but at the same time, we also draw on a lot of more experienced people who have more classic experience in industry. That's really bringing a lot of these different experiences together that's really important for us. Interesting. Now, we touched upon this a little bit, but if you're sort of talking about the future, so getting the crystal ball out and looking 5 years into the future, what would you hope Dawn Aerospace would look like in 5 years' time? Yeah,
in 5 years' time, I hope that we're doing a lot more in terms of getting stuff to space, and should be pretty well established in moving stuff around in space. So that's selling a lot of myriad of products to people who actually build satellites to give their satellites mobility. So that's full propulsion systems, that's maybe even our own satellites moving stuff around in space. That's certainly rocket motors as we currently do. And in terms of getting things to space, we hope to have the successor to the Mark II, so the Mark III, in early stages of testing, being able to show that we actually have something that can do truly reusable flights to and from space.
Cool. And that sort of sustainability angle, making sure that things are reusable and can be done, more regularly, is that quite unique relative to everyone else that is in the market that you guys are working in? And are you seeing others pop up, sort of seeing that it is, something that is a different idea that you're working steadily towards?
Yeah, I think we're one of the few that's been so bold as to say that it's really a necessity. It's not just a nice to have. This is not just something that we're saying to, I don't know, pander to the greenie crowd or something like that. This is something that we're saying because we think we need it as a business, we need it as an industry. Space is not going to become a big deal if we don't do this in a way that is properly sustainable. And that's actually our biggest fear, is that nobody actually gets there. Nobody figures out how to make this sustainable and therefore scalable to the extent that we need.
Interesting. So just on that point, if no one manages to achieve that, you're saying that it just over time costs too much money and there's too much wastage, or what does that end result look like if you don't manage to achieve it?
It just means that the huge opportunity of space will never quite be realized. It's kind of like if you never got fiber internet, if you were just stuck on dial-up right now, what would you be limited to? If you never knew fiber, okay, maybe you wouldn't be worried so much, but look at all the amazing things that fiber internet has enabled these days. You couldn't even dream of this 20 years ago. That's what we think space is like now. I think if somebody does figure out how to do truly scalable and sustainable and cost-effective access to space, the things that the amazingly creative people will come up with to utilize that amazing piece of infrastructure it'll blow your mind.
Incredible. And I mean, this, as you guys progress, is no doubt going to spawn a lot more industry around it in New Zealand. Have you started to see the green shoots of that already, or at least a lot more people are talking about it within New Zealand?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, space really only started being a thing in New Zealand sort of a decade ago, and you could argue we're a green shoot of that, and there's more coming left, right, and center for sure. There's a bunch of space startups in New Zealand now. It's turning into a thriving ecosystem.
That's really cool to hear. Now, for you said that you are growing considerably at the moment. I think you said around about 10 to 11 people that you're actively trying to hire. Outside from the direct qualifications that are probably necessary for a lot of the technical roles that you have, what are the key sort of traits and attributes that you look for when people do apply?
We really look for people that have strong integrity, that are really motivated by a deep sense of purpose, I would say. This is really a long haul. This company we're not about a sprint for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. This is a mission that we're working towards. It's gonna take, probably a couple of decades to really get to that final goal. So we want people who are really motivated to get there. They really need to believe in the vision that we're selling. Aside from that, we do need top people in terms of skills, in terms of knowledge and experience to be able to do these things, because they are genuinely hard.
Interesting. And then I suppose from a why standpoint, for someone that could be interested that's watching this, what do you love about working at Dawn, and why should anyone else get so excited about what you're doing?
Maybe I'm biased, but I think this is an amazing adventure. This is just my dream and the dream of the other founders of the company to be able to work on this stuff and make a real difference. And we truly believe we are going to make a real difference in the world, and that's why we get out of bed every day.
Good stuff. Now, your sort of early childhood of making stuff, and then eventually this has just kind of naturally progressed into well, not naturally, you've had to make some very deliberate decisions to go move to the other side of the world. But if you were thinking about, you speaking to the younger version of yourself, or anyone else that is, starting to consider their career journey, has there been any really good career advice that you've received, or anything else that you would share for other people that are thinking about what they might want to be doing next?
This is actually one that my mum, I'll steal from her, piece of advice that she gave me, or actually in arguing and trying to get me out of school to be able to go travel the world with them, in this case around the States. And they didn't want to let me get out of school for, I think it was 6 weeks or something that I needed to get out of third form. And she told me not to let school get in the way of my education. So that doesn't necessarily mean that school is there to stop your education, but it's a recognition that school is only a part of your education, and that everything else you do in your life plays a huge role in teaching you how to build a business or how to follow your dreams or your passions or whatever. And school is a foundation for that, but everything else is also a major contributor.
That's incredible advice from Mum. We've had a couple of people that have had some real nuggets of wisdom from their mothers as well. So that's certainly one to add to the list. It's not the only place you should be learning. And I suppose that must be what you look for a lot of the time is when people are applying is what are they doing outside of those traditional education institutions in terms of their own projects and what have you.
Absolutely. That them showing initiative is so important.
Good stuff. Hey, we're going to leave it there for today, but I can't thank you enough for taking the time, Stefan. I think what you guys are doing is beyond incredible and just super exciting to hear from someone that is so deep involved in it in terms of the ideation right through to where you are today. So I know everyone else that gets a chance to listen to this will greatly appreciate it. And yeah, we really do thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. It's been great to talk.